So I think I'm all set, and I'm live on both YouTube and Facebook. So hopefully you can find me right in one of the two places. Okay, let's see. So I've had a few things going on. One is I have been working on writing that post of girls with autism. And I have to say, it's been really interesting putting together this post and kind of talking about and researching the things in which why girls with autism are often, I guess, underdiagnosed would be the best word, right? So it's been fascinating kind of reading through all of this. And it was interesting too, because again, I have surviving quadruplets, and out of my children, all three of my surviving quadruplets have been diagnosed as having autism. So this includes both my, well, let's see. So Margaret, technically my daughter, she was diagnosed at 3 years old, and it was really difficult. I had a difficult time getting her this diagnosis because she was very verbal. So they kept telling me, they're like, oh, she's fine, don't worry about it. She's verbal, she's talking. And I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah, she is verbal, but here's the problem. Yes, she's verbal and talking, but I can sit there and tell you, like, first, when she did start talking, she only could label stuff. That's it. So she would look at a board book, and then I would point to things and she could label it. It's a tree, it's a car, it's a, she would just she would say the word of whatever it was. But I noticed she couldn't string the words together. She was having a hard time, it seemed like, kind of pulling it together and being able to string her words together. And I didn't understand what was going on. And I didn't know anything about autism at that point. So my daughter also had some really kind of odd behaviors. And one of the things we noticed too that she used to do, so she was huge into watching PBS shows. And really that was all we did. I had my TV, I had no cable. And I didn't want cable because I felt like with my oldest children, I had sort of made the mistake of having them watch TV. And I felt like commercials are a huge influencer, right? And not in a positive way. So I was like, I'm going to whack that out, and I'm just going to do Netflix or something, right? I'm going to stream videos and TV content. So that's what I did for them. And it was really interesting because when Margaret would sit down and she would watch a video, she would get this weird look on her face. It was kind of like this, literally like eyes wider, mouth open, just staring. It's kind of like a blank stare. And so my husband and I used to joke. We were like, hey, that is her record mode. And basically that's what it was. She was in record mode. She was watching these things and sort of recording what was happening. Down to the music, the characters and what they were doing, the sound effects, all of it, every last bit of it. And it was fascinating watching her because she kept running around. And as she would run around, she progressed, right? She went from just saying only words to now she's speaking in sentences. But the sentences, I'm like, okay, so that's Ni Hao Kai Lan, that's Blue's Clues, that is Super Y. That I could literally kind of just go, okay, so that yes, she is speaking in a sentence, but that sentence is exactly the same sentence that's in this TV show. And she had recorded it all. And before she got her diagnosis, and I still, I didn't understand what autism is or anything like that. And I remember kind of a very poignant moment for me where I knew that she had issues, but I didn't know, like I said, what was going on. And we're sitting it was a Quest Diagnostic Center. So I don't know if you've ever been there to have them do a blood draw, but you're there for hours. And we were there for quite some time, and she's running around in the waiting room going crazy. And a lady stops her and says, hi, what's your name? And so then Margaret tells her like this line out of the show that she's sort of been running around and reenacting. I mean, down again, like I said, to the sound effects and other things. And she came back, you know, like she was running around some more, and the woman stalked her again and was like, you know, hi, you know, what are you doing? And the woman wouldn't answer, or Margaret wouldn't answer. And so the woman was very perplexed by her. And I was like, yeah, you know, she's just sort of off in her own world and she's having fun. I didn't realize that what she was doing, you know, that was having echolate speech. It's delayed echolalia. She heard all this information on the show and then is able to much later to recall it and then sort of use that information. So there were a lot of signs that were signs of autism that I didn't realize were going on at the time. But like I said, that all had to do with the fact that I didn't understand what autism was. And I find it really interesting because I think it's still something that is, I guess, a problem right now for girls in particular. So girls are well-spoken, they are less likely to wind up getting a diagnosis of autism unless they also have some intellectual impairment or they have behavioral issues. So this is, like I said, been really fascinating, kind of doing this research when it comes to girls and autism. So I should have that post posted by Monday with any luck. That's my plan. So, because I got a lot of other things I got to do, and I still need to transfer some posts over to our new blog site. So, all right. So, yeah, this was me delaying for a little bit while we have everybody hopefully start to file in this evening. So, hi, Jackie. How are you? Thanks for joining. Hi, Terry. Thank you for joining. Terry is in Mississippi. Sarah's here. Hi, Sarah. And she said, yep, took a couple of minutes for my Facebook to grab it, missed the first 2 minutes. Well, it was just me kind of chatting about girls and autism. So you haven't missed much yet this evening, right? And let me kind of pull this off. So I don't know if anybody has any particular questions. Yeah, Jackie is saying, good. Hello, all. Yes. Hello to everyone. And thank you for joining me, whether it's on the Facebook Live and the IEP/504 assistance group, or if you're joining me on YouTube. So Terry was saying, I have a question, can take a left. So Sarah was just saying, so happy to see your face. Thank you. Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here this evening. Whew, it has been a long day for me. So I am glad like things are winding down, right? And now we get to sit and we get to chat. And then hopefully I'll be able to give you information that you will find useful as you continue to work and fight with your school districts. All right. And then I'm going to go here and kind of look at, because we've had some really interesting questions just recently in the group too. So this way, if nobody's posting any particular question, I'm going to go over a few of the things that have been sort of going on in the IEP 504 group. Let me get over there myself. All right, there we go. So Terry was saying, is it playing? She's like, I can't find it. I hope you guys have found it okay now. I don't know why, if you're having any problems connecting, why that might be occurring, but do know, yes, it is up and running. So yay. All right. Oh, and Terry was saying that she attended trauma cognitive therapy session, and my son said during the session, he wants to be white and is self-hating. Oh no. So Terry has a really interesting and complex problem. And being in Mississippi, Terry herself is African-American, and her son is African-American. And I grew up in the Deep South, and I know, and believe it or not, I was actually born in Mississippi, and I know I don't sound like it. Well, I say that. Technically, I was born in Memphis, Tennessee. So if you know the state, like it's pretty much right there on the state line practically. And all my relatives lived in Mississippi. In any case, though, Mississippi is still kind of a stronghold, unfortunately, for like some white supremacy things going on. And it seems like that's sort of what she may have encountered through one of the children her child, attends school with. And so she's been dealing with some really complex issues. So I'm more than happy to help you, Terry. And we have to figure out, like, hopefully we get to meet up tomorrow evening. So do let me know a time that works for you. Carrie is also working with me on putting together our material for our advocacy class. So I'm really looking forward to that. Let's see. So Feltonia was saying she can't find it. So you mean the Facebook Live? Because I do see your comments in the Facebook Live. Or do you mean the YouTube channel? So the YouTube channel is at a link at the top of the page. And I found out, or maybe it's my oldest son told me, that if I am doing YouTube Live, if you're on a phone, you can't actually post anything. And I didn't realize that. So that's part of the reason I'm doing these in Facebook Live too in the group, because I know that you can post there, and a lot of people do. And a lot of people will post questions that they would like answered. So let's see. So Terry is just saying, should I warn the school before our meeting next week, as my son is saying in therapy that he wants to put the kid's head in the toilet? No, not yet, unless you think he may actually act upon it. If you think he may actually act upon it, then yes, you may do better to go ahead and say something. And then also maybe write something to the school saying that you would like them to provide counseling services to your son, about like helping him get over his feelings, obviously, of anger, right? So, and Feltonia was just saying, she goes, I found it and it took a little while to connect. So I don't know why it's being slow. That is a Facebook issue, unfortunately, and not something that I can control. Okay, so we did have a poster who posted a question, and she was out of Arizona. And so she was talking about her son had been in public school and that he has cerebral palsy, and he's now in 2nd grade. And one of the things that I was explaining to Sarah is Arizona has a program called the Empowerment Scholarship, and it was something I think that might be worthwhile to have her look into, because she was looking at wanting to only have her son do school part-time, and like homeschool the rest of the day. And so the Empowerment Scholarship account, the ESA, would give her that flexibility, along with, if she wanted to, potentially to put him into a private school. And the private schools, there's quite a few here in the Arizona area who will only work like with a child one-on-one when it comes to core subjects. So I think that's a great opportunity for those who have various learning disabilities, because it really helps the child, to like focus, right? Because there's no distractions. It's just you and the teacher, and you're working. So I think the Empowerment Scholarship could be something that'd be really helpful. And I had given some information on that, and then Sarah had said, thank you. And that the school was trying to encourage her to do partial days. So if so, that's good. But I will tell you, and this kind of goes like for no matter what state you're in, the state laws vary when it comes to if you're homeschooling. So in Arizona, it's kind of interesting, because if you take the Empowerment Scholarship account, your child is still technically considered a public school student who is taught at home. But when you fill out the affidavit of intent to homeschool and file that with the state, then they are technically, legally speaking, a homeschooler, and therefore fall under the same rules as a private school student, because that's what Arizona state law dictates. So just kind of a little bit of the state law and how that works. And then again, this information also varies from state to state. So if you have any questions, please let me know, and I can help you figure out what your state law is. Let's see. All right. I don't have any more comments here in the group, so I'm hoping that I'm seeing the comments. Okay, and then we had another member who, Brina said, what does it look like to part-time school with an IEP? And that she was looking, again, same kind of situation where she wants her child in school part-time, and then the rest of the time that she would homeschool. And so she was wanting to know, would your child continue to have an IEP and would they get their services? So again, this radically varies by state, and it depends on what your state law says. So I know that Arizona, for instance, it's up to the discretion of the school district whether they continue to offer services to the child. Now, the IEP will go out of date, and if you put the child back into the public school system, you have to start the whole special education process over again. And that can be really painful, but it is, it's something you can do. And then for those of you in other states, I know like New York, I've heard of several people, you can keep your IEP. They actually keep your IEP, which I think is sort of interesting if you homeschool. And then what they do is they offer you the related services. So any kind of therapy or anything like that. Now, I've known of several people who have exercised this option. Some have been pleased that they did it and others have not. So it just depends on the quality of services that you're getting. And then also there's sort of this frustration threshold, right? Like, how easy is it to continue to get services? Are you fighting with the school district constantly and they're questioning everything that you ask for? If so, then maybe that, you may want to let those go and just use your state benefits, your Medicaid benefits for your child, assuming they qualify for said benefits. And then again, just to throw this out here too, right? Do be aware that if you say like you don't meet the financial threshold, you actually exceed the financial threshold for Medicaid in your state. Often, many states, not all, but many states have a Medicaid waiver, and they have waiver programs. Now, some states, these programs, like it's 10 plus years to be on their waiver list. Some state waivers, you're talking like 3 to 5 years. So if you move states, do make sure you take the time to investigate as to what the situation is in the state in which you're moving to, right? And there's a great site, let's see, I think it's kidwaivers.org. And this site is really nice in the fact that they have like all the waivers for all the states listed there. And that's where I go and I look and get information for people when they ask me. So Sarah was saying that Mississippi specifically states that it does not allow home instruction, homeschool with the scholarship. Well, that's interesting. So Arizona's program is it's not just a scholarship. It's really kind of a, well, no, it is a scholarship. So it's a school choice program. And, you get to kind of direct where the money is sent. And I do know the rules that we have in Arizona are a lot more flexible. They give the parent a lot more power than most of the other programs I've seen in other states. Not to mention, we tend to get a lot more money. So those are like very different things, right? So it just depends on what your rules are. And I know in the South, again, that was part of the reason why I left. So I had my children in Alabama. I delivered them in Huntsville, Alabama, and I stayed there for 2 years and I left. And why? Because the state didn't have good services to offer my children. So we left, and we've moved 4 times to 4 different states looking for good services, and we've wound up in Arizona. And I have to say, overall, I'm very happy that we're here. We get more help, more money, more respite, more pretty much everything here than we had in any other state in which we've lived. So again, I've been very happy with the services and very happy with the ESA program, because that is what I use here in the state of Arizona, even though my husband is a public school teacher. So I know that confuses a lot of people, but he's a public school teacher and he knows the state of public schools, and especially for special education, and agrees that, it would be difficult for the school to service the children. So it makes more sense for us to exercise our school voucher option or school choice option and participate in the ESA program. So Terry was just saying, I just want to say working with Michelle has helped me get everything I wanted. Nothing was denied in my end of year. So good. I'm glad to hear that. I know that Terry's been working really hard, like I said. All I've done is just supply her mostly with the knowledge. So basically kind of consider me, I guess, kind of like a DIY advocate, right? So I'm very knowledgeable. I am a special education advocate, and I practice special education advocacy all across the United States. I think I've helped people literally in all 50 states. And it's a common practice that I do, and I enjoy it very much. But my goal is I don't want you to come to me one-on-one like you do with most advocates, and you bring me a problem, and then I just fix it for you. No, I want you to learn so that way you are empowered, because who can you rely on, right? I was just having this conversation with one of the members out of the group. You know, you can't rely on the advocate to be there. You can't rely on anyone else. The only person you can kind of rely on is yourself. And so the best thing that you can do is to self-educate. And if you're having a hard time because you don't know where to start, somebody like me and my group, you know, I want to help you get to where you need to go. And yes, you could go to a parent training center and they will help you. And eventually, if you go to all of their trainings, you will learn a lot, right? But this group allows you to come in and get professional knowledge to help you with your situations, anywhere between free to costing very little money. And that's part of the reason I want to kind of practice this new concept of group advocacy, where I have all of you kind of pay me a little bit of money. So hopefully everybody, please go get your bronze membership at AESA.group. It's my plug for the night. And so that helps not only to kind of pay me, and really it's sort of reimburse me for the things that I do already, but it helps fund the nonprofit, my nonprofit. And I'm really excited about that because I'm really excited about the Reed Scholarship. And I mentioned it a few times before, but I mean, it is a great concept. And I did come out of Connecticut. They have something called the Self Fund in Connecticut, where parents are awarded a grant and they use that grant money in order to secure an attorney to take the school to due process. That's what I want to do, but I want to take that out of just Connecticut because that's a program that's only in Connecticut. And I'm bringing it here first to Arizona. And then after that, after we have our first cycle, we're either going to either open up the membership to apply to all of the United States, or we're going to work on establishing chapters of AESA because we're going to change our name to American Exceptional Students Association, okay? Because I know it'd be weird to have like Arizona Exceptional Students Association in other states. So in June, we are going to be changing our name to American Exceptional Students Association. And then we hope to open up chapters so that we can have this Reed Scholarship available to everyone. I think everyone should have the right, if they've run into a point where they can't do anything else with their school district, that they can then turn around and then get money to retain an attorney to take the school to due process. So I'm really excited about that. So anyways, again, please go to aesa.group. Is it this way? No, this way. aesa.group. And then we have our promo code for this month of AESA April for the bronze quarterly membership. So it's free for 30 days, so you can check out the site. Also, if you need me during the day, the members forum on the AESA's website is where you can find me, okay? So Feltonia was just saying, she said, my son has FBA BIP and that he's been eloping a lot lately and having serious issues communicating his feelings to the point he's letting out his frustration by hitting himself. His next IEP meeting is on Monday. So how can I request that they pay for a BCBA to come in and help my autistic son? So Feltonia, my first question is, when was the last time that they did the FBA? Was it less than a year ago? If it was less than a year ago, then you can request an IEE for the FBA. Also, you could just request an FBA and then use his behaviors as the reason we need a new one. Here's the proof, the data. The data shows he's eloping more, right? He's having more issues communicating. We're getting more behavior issues. That's essentially data. And you can go, hey, we're having all these additional things, or, you know, everything's escalating, right? It's getting worse. So obviously his current plan is not working. So we need to now develop a new plan. And the school may want to do that themselves and not use a BCBA, and that would be okay. And then you could try the new plan. And if it's not working again, then you can go back and say, okay, well, now I'd like an IEE and I want a BCBA to come in and to evaluate my child. Because again, we did the FBA and it's not acceptable, right? It's not working. So that's where you kind of come in with all of this. You come in and you're like, hey, you know, I'm having these issues. I can see here, you know, I've gotten report after report after report of my child eloping, report after report after report of him misbehaving and kind of hitting himself because he's so angry. You know, that's a problem. And then obviously that FBA isn't working. Let's see. So Sarah was just saying, she had a question. So she said her son has high functioning autism, as well as, is it SCZ, is it schizophrenia? And that he has avoidance and disruptive behaviors in the classroom, but is cooperative one-on-one. So I've requested for him to get a one-on-one aid. At the last IEP meeting, I was told that they do not want to teach him helplessness or ostracize him from his peers. So I wholeheartedly feel this will be the only way in which he will be successful in general education. How would you advise to continue to fight to get his support? So here's the thing. He's already ostracized because of his behaviors. I mean, I would find it hard to believe that the other children in the general education classroom aren't noticing what's going on. And I would be really shocked if he was not ostracized because of it. Now, I think like that's just like it's a ridiculous argument essentially on their behalf. Now, as far as helplessness, again, I think that's kind of silly because again, if you're seeing behaviors or you're not seeing an increase in academics, right? These are these key areas. So if you can collect data, the school should be collecting data, and you should be able to kind of point to stuff and go, hey, you know, you've been working with my child in the general education classroom and he's made minimal or no progress. So with that, we need more supports. So one of the potential supplemental aids and services that we can have is to have a one-on-one aid. And this is something that we haven't tried yet. And then they're going to go, well, I don't want to let them have a one-on-one aid. And then you say, so where is the data to support that? Right? Where is the data to support that? They don't have data either. So let's trial a one-on-one aid, right, between now until the end of the school year and see how things go so that we can collect data. So that's how I would go about that. And then also you want to kind of hit them with least restrictive environment. So you're going to make that argument that you are to try all supplemental aids and services within reason, right, to help your child stay in what is the least restrictive environment. And I have posted that law, I know, several times into the group, but I can absolutely post that information again. As a matter of fact, I'll sit here and kind of look for some of that now. But do realize that's kind of where your argument is. And you can also look in the group for more information. So you would look for hashtag LRE for least restrictive environment. Let's see. And then I have, let me think, hashtag behavior. And it seems like there was one more that I have in the group, but that'll get you started and you pull up some information for you. Oh, and Philtonia said we did the FBA 3 months ago. Perfect, Philtonia. So what you want to do now is then to go back and say, obviously this is not working. I'm requesting an IEE for a new FBA MBIP to be completed, right? And I want it done by a BCBA, somebody who is trained in what needs to be done, because what the school has put together is not effective. So I think that's how I would go about asking them for that. Okay. And she said the FBA is 5 months. So you're good. You just need to be under a year. So as long as it's been less than a year, it's reasonable to go back in and ask for an IEE for your FBA and BIP. You want to make sure you continue that through to that whole behavior plan development, right? So you don't want to do just the FBA and then stop and then let the school take over doing the new BIP, since they didn't seem like they did a good job with the first one. So to me, it makes more sense that we're going to ask in our IEE for both the FBA and the BIP. And then Sarah's saying, awesome. Yes, data collection. Thank you. Yep, it's all about the data. So I don't know if many people sort of realize this, right? But school and public education has essentially gotten to the point your child is a data point on a graph. This is what happens with public education now. And so what they care about is data. What kind of proof can you show? And this is one of the reasons why I tell parents all the time, right? It's all about what you can prove. What do you have? You know, what information did the school give you that you can kind of use to show them, hey, you know, there's issues here. This can be homework. Like I've had parents tell me, we've gotten homework. My kids come in with homework. We have homework. They come home and then we do all homework and then there's lots of crying and then it's bedtime. And so I tell them, I'm like, no, you know, based on what is reasonable for your child's age and grade is however long you should be spending on homework. And then you stop. And if it's not done, it's not done. And then write on the homework, right? I sat down and I helped my child with their homework. I sat here the entire time. We worked on it for this long. It took us this long to get there. And then these are the concepts it seems like my child does not understand. Write all of that on the paper and send it back. By the way, take a picture or scan the information too, right? Because miraculously, a lot of times, those papers disappear. The teacher goes, oh, I never saw it. Well, you should have, because, you know, here's my copy of it, right? You want to practice what I call CYA, cover your, you know. And so it's always good before you send anything back, please make sure you make your own copies. So that way you have the information also. So Philtonia was like, yes, IE. And by the way, Philtonia, just so you know, if you search the group for hashtag IEE, again, you will pull up a lot of information, okay? I work really hard trying to make sure that I hashtag a lot of the information that I add into the group, so that way it's easy for you guys to find it if you need to search the group for information. It's also easy for me to find it too, in case I need to give it to you. Okay. So, because we've had some really interesting questions go on. There was a question about a service dog in the school. So I have not ever heard of the school helping or assisting a parent in getting a service dog. So if anyone has, I would absolutely love to hear from you, because this is, yeah, I've never heard of it before. But it is important for you to know if you do have a service animal for your child, okay? So I'm not talking about like a therapy pet. What do they call it? Emotional support animal, right? I'm not talking about an emotional support animal. What I'm talking about is a true service animal, okay, that's been certified. If you have one of those, please know your child is allowed to bring that animal to school. Now, typically it's a dog. I have seen some service cats and a few other things. But know that it is within your right to have that animal accompany your child to school. So if you need information on that, please let me know, because I do have guidance on that topic, okay? And it's great guidance too. It's from the Department of Justice. Let's see. So one of the questions Juliet asked earlier, she said, how do you get the school to do ABA? We just got a psych evaluation privately for her child, and the psych had recommended ABA therapy. So can the school offer that, or does someone come, or does it come from a private source? So this goes back kind of to some of these topics I've talked before, which is there's a difference, right, between medical and educational therapies. So this was a medical exam done by a medical doctor, the psychiatrist, who then made a medical recommendation. So with that, I would actually go back to your child's primary care doctor, pediatrician, and then ask for a referral to get, your medical ABA therapy through your insurance, and they should pay. Now, the question is how much, right, should they pay? Now, most states, and this is another topic that we discussed in the group in the last couple of days, which is most states have laws, if you aren't aware of this, they have laws or passed laws concerning medical coverage and autism. So if your child has an medical autism diagnosis, many times that means they have a certain level of medical coverage that the state or others must supply. And I know here in Arizona, one of the things that gets you is 40 hours potentially of ABA therapy. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily easy to find an ABA therapist who takes state Medicaid and is available for 40 hours a week. It's a different problem, right? But they're allowed and they can bill up to 40 hours. Now, if your child doesn't have an medical autism eligibility, then it can be really hard. Like they may limit how much your child can get. But again, you should then be able to go back not only to the therapist, but to your child's primary care physician, and then ask them, hey, I need more of this therapy. It is proven to be effective. And then they should be able to kind of help you fight for an appeal with your insurance, the state medical Medicaid program, help you fight for an appeal and get more information. Okay, sorry, I blipped there, I think, for a minute. Okay, so your medical doctor should then be able to fight and help you get your child more therapy services, okay? So I just wanted to let you know, like, don't give up, right? Continue fighting. The school should help. Your primary care doctor should be able to help. There's several mechanisms that you can kind of like squeeze and work on in order to try to get your child the ABA therapy he needs. Now, when it comes to the school can do it too. The school can supply ABA therapy. They don't like to. They often would have to hire somebody outside as a consultant. They don't tend to have them on staff. But they absolutely can also supply your child ABA therapy. The trick is that you're going to have to prove your child needs that therapy in order to achieve a free, appropriate public education, FAPE, right? So that's the tricky part. So you have to get the school to accept that they need to supply it so that they are supplying your child FAPE. And that can be trickier. So we would have to talk more to try to help figure that out. So Pamela, hi, how are you? She said, hi, everyone. I'm sneaking away for a few minutes to tune in. So glad you're here with us. And please, if you have any questions, please let me know. So Sarah said, is there a time limit that the school has to provide your child with supports? So she's like an example, an aid. So we don't have one. We'll need to hire someone to be his aide. She said, what do you feel is a reasonable time period if it's not in the law? So that's a really good question, right? So once you sign off on the IEP, when is your IEP then in effect? Your IEP should pretty much go into effect immediately. There shouldn't be like some huge gap. Like 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that. Now, because of how the schools pay the aides, I don't know if you've ever looked at any of the job postings for school aides or paraprofessionals. They pretty much pay the minimum wage. So it can be really difficult for the school to find somebody, and especially this late into the school year when people really aren't looking for school jobs, to be able to secure an aide. So I'm not really sure. I would say if it drug on for more than like a couple of weeks, then the first thing you might want to try is just to send a nice but firm reminder to the IEP staff and the principal, and then just say, hey, as an IEP team, we had this IEP meeting, and in the meeting, we had agreed that my child needs an aide or a paraprofessional. And so this was determined by the IEP team that it's necessary in order for my child to gain FAPE, right? So by continuing not to supply my child with the supplemental aids and services that they need, you are essentially denying my child FAPE. And then I would ask them, would you please assign someone to go work with my child, even if this needs to be for right now a teacher, and it is their planning period, for them to come in and to work with my child as their aide until you can hire someone on. And the teachers won't like it, but it is a very reasonable request to pull teachers from their planning period, because there's probably more than one in that school during that time, so they can rotate off. So it's not, every day the same person is having to go in and lose their planning period. But it's reasonable. And also, for administrative staff to step in a couple of times and also function as an aide. There's nothing stopping that. They just don't want to. So that's why you may want to kind of point out to them, hey, you're denying my child FAPE because the IEP team had decided this is what my child needed to gain FAPE in the educational environment. So I think that's what I would try to do first. And then that's how I would go about trying to solve the issue of the school district not being able to hire an aide. And I know a few people have used that tactic before and have been successful, that the school did pull teachers during their planning period to then function as that child's aide until they got someone hired in on a more permanent basis. Let's see. So Pamela was saying, is it discriminatory in Arizona if the child is older than 6, the access will not cover ABA? I appealed this decision but was denied. So Pamela, my question is, does your child have a medical diagnosis of autism? In Arizona, you have to have either a child psychologist, a developmental pediatrician, or a neuropsychologist make that determination for access to accept you. So do you have that? If so, there is state law in place for ABA therapy, and I don't understand why they would deny your child ABA therapy. Also, you're talking about access, which again, that's medical, it's not educational. So that's a little bit different. And I do help parents with medical advocacy for their children. And we can talk more about that later if you're interested. So Feltonia was saying, currently my son has a one-on-one aide. With my son eloping, self-harming, and not participating in schoolwork, is that enough to show that he needs ABA therapist with an RBT certified aide? So I think it's reasonable to request ABA therapy, considering all of that is going on. And I think it's reasonable to request that your aide have training. I don't know about RBT certified. Matter of fact, I will confess, I'm not even entirely sure what RBT certification is for an aide. But the school is required to properly train staff who work with your child. And if your child is eloping and self-harming, and the aide is letting this happen, then obviously the aide is not trained in what they need to be doing to intervene, right, to keep this behavior from happening. That all of this is kind of escalating to the point that these behaviors are occurring, and the aide should have noticed and stopped whatever it was that's going on before it reached that level, and it's not happening. So to me, it is clearly a lack of training on the aide's behalf. So I do think that's quite reasonable. So Sarah was saying, how long before you can say the FBA isn't working? At my son's last meeting requested by me to update and modify his FBA, I was told I really should give this more time. It doesn't take more than really a month, and I would say 2 months max, for them to consistently with fidelity, been able to collect enough data to make a determination. Okay. So, and I don't know because she didn't state how long, but it's a common tactic for schools to kind of delay. And you don't want them to pull that. So, you don't need it for too long. I would say on average, it tends to be 6 weeks or a grading period. But depending on the severity of the behaviors, you may only say a month, right? And then after a month, you're like, we should have enough data by now. And again, don't be afraid to, when it talks about update and modify as FBA, then you tell them, where's the data that you've collected to this point? I want to see how much data have you generated up to this point, if it's been a month. And then ask them, why don't you have more data? My concern is they're not collecting data. They're prone to doing that. They'll wait, and then right at the last minute, collect a bunch of data in a really short time frame instead of collecting data over the whole, like month or 6 weeks or the grading period. So that's something else too, is you want to ask them, how is the data collected? What dates did you collect data? So Pamela said yes, and I had lots of documentation. It's very interesting because if your child is 6 and in this state in Arizona, then you should be able to apply for DDD and access services. So I'm confused by that. So yes, we do need to talk some more. I might be able to help you out. Okay, let's see. What else do we have here for topics for tonight? We'd already kind of discussed that one. So another member, Angela, had talked about that she was from Massachusetts, and they were looking to move her son from the least restrictive environment, general education setting, into a separate subclass, essentially this class that is like an inclusion class, or maybe even fully segregated. She said it was a separate class, and she was saying that she wanted to keep him in the general education population, partially because of role modeling, right? Well, and she was going to need a parent. So again, you hear this argument often from schools. So what they'll tell you is it is more restrictive to have your child in the general education setting with a paraprofessional than it is to put your child into a more restrictive environment. And, where it's like part recess for the day, or it's a fully inclusion type of self-contained classroom. And just know they're lying to you if they tell you that. It is actually less restrictive for your child to be in the general education classroom with a paraprofessional or adult aide versus moving them to that more restrictive setting. And again, for that, it's an argument about least restrictive environment, continuum of services, and then you want to kind of look at, what is encompassed when you say supplemental aids and services. Well, that does include paraprofessionals. Paraprofessionals are considered supplemental aids and services. So the law makes it very clear that the child is to be educated in that least restrictive environment with all supplemental aids and services that are needed. It makes sense for your child before considering moving into a more restrictive environment. Also know the IEP team can't just unilaterally kind of run over you and then place your child in a more restrictive setting. They also can't do that without you present. You must be in attendance. And there is federal law that states this, that educational placement, the parent must attend the meeting where you're discussing educational placement, unless you've just said, I've waived my right to attend. So do be aware you do have rights, and you have rights by law. So make sure you are exercising those rights, okay? And then I have a question here. So I have a question here on Facebook, and she says, how much homework does my child need? Well, your child needs as much homework as they need in order to be successful in school. So it's however much that needs, right? In many cases, a lot of children wind up having their homework levels when they're a child with disability cut in half. So the workload isn't overwhelming them. And I think that's really important to consider, right? Because you don't want them overwhelmed with a ton of schoolwork that they can't accomplish. And that's sort of what I was talking about earlier, right? That if your child has so much homework that they're spending like 2 hours at home doing homework at night and they're in second grade, that just doesn't make any sense. So you want to make sure that you then ask for like reduced homework loads. Also try to get down to what is the problem? Why can't they do what is expected of them homework wise that the other students are seeming to be able to accomplish? And you would do that by asking the school for a full psychoeducational evaluation. Okay. So we did have this other question too, and I thought this was interesting for the evening, where it talked about is a school legally able to hold a child from the mother or the father? Like, can one ask the school hold the child and not release the child to the other biological parent? So from my understanding, now this also kind of gets into other laws, and I'm not as well versed in some of those, but from my understanding, the school cannot do that. The school cannot hold a child from the other biological parent unless, for some reason, the school has a court order or the school has been told by CPS that they are not allowed to release the child to the other parent. And that, as far as I know, would be the only reason a school would not release the child. And the school shouldn't be taking sides over one or the other. So again, it's kind of a unique and unusual problem, right? But something that can be addressed, essentially. Okay. Let's see. So Sarah said, what document is it that lists the available aids, supports, and services a school must try before changing their environment? I found it once years ago, and I haven't been able to find it since. Is it in IDEA? So IDEA just mentions supplemental aids and services. Like, federal law is not very specific. And they do that on purpose so that states have room to come and interpret the federal law on their end and how they're going to administer this federal law. And then as far as your state may have information potentially, and I can look for that for you, Sarah, because Sarah's also in Mississippi. And if I can't find it there, then I do have a few other resources that kind of spell out at least some of the things that are considered to be supplemental aids and services. So yes, I can get you some information on that. So Melissa said Texas here. Yes, the great state of Texas, and you guys have had a tremendous difficulty in special education. So I have quite a few from Texas who are in my group. And she goes on to say, can a school give an autism diagnosis? I have asked it written in, but they aren't going over it. So she said they aren't going over it. They said she doesn't meet the typical signs, but stated she has some sensory issues. Her doctor did give us a referral for testing, but I'm curious on the school's approach. This is just kind of what I was talking about earlier, right? So there's a difference between a medical diagnosis and an educational diagnosis. There's a difference between medical therapy and educational therapy. And it's really important to understand these differences. I know when I first started in special education, I had no idea either. I didn't realize they were different things, but they are. They truly are different things. And it sounds like your daughter, I'm assuming Melissa, does not currently have a medical diagnosis of autism, okay? Now, under IDEA, there are roughly 13 categories of disabilities that are defined. One of them is autism. In that category, under IDEA, the federal law, Some states then went and, either adopted the federal law as their definition, or what they did is they made their own version, right? And it shouldn't be more restrictive than what the federal version is, okay? So do know too, if your state's definition is more restrictive, that is of a concern, because federal law reigns supreme over state law, okay? It's just called federal supremacy. They can't be more restrictive than what the federal law says. So they should be less restrictive, more inclusive, right? More children should be able to qualify. And I'll have to go back and look. I have the information. Matter of fact, you might even be able, well, I know you will turn up a lot of information, Melissa, in the group if you search the group as #TX, right? Texas. But I also have a lot of information on autism in particular, and you can even search like #TX and then #ASD for autism, and you may come across this answer. If not, I will post it here shortly and give you what your state's educational definition is for autism. Now, the idea is the federal law that lays this framework, right? And for the educational eligibility for a child to receive special education. It is not a diagnosis. It's just an eligibility classification for your child to receive special education services and nothing more. Schools do not make medical diagnoses. Now, they might use a lot of the tests, but they can't literally make a true medical diagnosis. I know some of them say that they do, but they shouldn't be doing that. And so I hear that sporadically, but not often. Anyways, though, just be aware that, like I said, it is a little different. Now, when she said she doesn't meet the typical signs, just so you know, I was working on, and that's what I very first started talking about when I started this video, is I'm working on a blog post right now on girls and autism. And it's very interesting because it discusses how gender differences, like what gender differences there are in the presentation of girls with autism versus boys with autism. And that you hear that boys with autism, it's a lot more prevalent in boys. And now they're starting to think that's not necessarily true. What it is that the medical definition, okay, so the medical definition for autism is in what's called the DSM-5. That's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, 5th edition. And I do have this information in the group. I also have it on AESA's website. So you can join there and find the information there too. But the information on the medical version of autism, it's skewed essentially more towards, diagnosing guys, men, boys versus girls and women. And it's been fascinating kind of doing this research and putting this blog post together. And like I said, I should have this blog post together and should hopefully have it published on Monday. Okay, because I have quite a few resources that I pulled in. And I think I've researched and I've read about 15 medical journal articles to help put this post together. And then I'll also add in other resources and things. So again, if you have not looked into that, I really hope that you guys do join AESA.group, our website, and sign up for a bronze level membership, which is only $25 a year or $10 per quarter. I mean, it's not much money at all, but it gives you access to all of my blog posts. And in my blog posts, I have a plethora of links. So please make sure if you do read my blog post, take time to click on all the links. The links I put in there is for you to help you understand where all this resource material I use to pull the post together, like where it came from. And a lot of times I'm using peer-reviewed journal articles, whether they're medical, psychological, or they're school-related in some way. Like there's an association for school psychologists, and then there's the Council of School Lawyers, COSA. And often I pull this information from places like that to write these articles. Because again, I don't want you to rely just on me. I don't want you, to hear me and then go, oh, well, this is all that we need to do. No, please take the time and research this information. I work really hard to make sure you give like the source, right? I don't want you quoting me, just like I've had people in the group before. They're like, well, I quoted, rights law, and the school got all mad at me. That's because they don't care. They don't care what I say. They don't care necessarily what rights law says. What they care about is the law, or what you can prove, or put together what they would consider to be, very authoritative, credible evidence. And so medical journal articles or peer-reviewed journal articles are a very clear, authoritative, reference, and they're good to quote. And by all means, I do hope you guys take the time and you print that stuff off and read it. Let's see. All right. So I was looking to see if we have any more questions. I don't have any more questions right now. I will make sure, like I said, Melissa, to come back through, and I'll give you the information in the group of what you need for the educational definition of autism in Texas. So that way you can better understand. And you didn't state in your question, you did mention that they agreed that she had sensory issues. Did they look to see what her social skills were? How well does she communicate? Does she get subtle social cues through language? Because usually girls have a big problem with that. Boys do too. But normally girls are very fluent in language, and they're kind of excel in language compared to boys. And then it's interesting because when it is a girl with autism, they often have noticeable difficulties in the social pragmatic language, figurative language. They don't seem to understand it. They struggle with the social skills. And then also, you didn't mention as to if they looked at and evaluated for anxiety and or depression. It is very common for girls with autism to suffer from anxiety and or depression. Girls are well known to mask their autism symptoms. And you may see that by, her having sort of meltdowns when she gets home, right? Because it's exhausting. Or actually, you may even see that instead of a meltdown, she's just really fatigued and lifeless for a while as she's sort of recovering from spending all day, kind of restraining herself, masking what are her symptoms. So Sarah was saying, this QA is such a blessing. So much great information from everyone's questions. Well, thank you. And I will continue to do these as long as people turn in and then ask questions. Because my goal is to do these is to, kind of like I said, help educate and train the parent. I don't want you to need me. I want to put myself out of business, theoretically, right? I want to train an army of advocates to go forth and help advocate not only for your own child, but to advocate for others. And I think that's incredibly important to do. So Pamela was saying, I think my son is starting puberty and he will be 10 next month. My daughter, who is 11, has. I'm still not completely at grips with it. She said, are there any good resources to start that conversation with him? Yes, there are, and I have quite a few. Not only do I have several recommendations for books, but there are social stories that you can use. So depending on his level of understanding, sort of dictates what you might want to use as far as material. And she said also they're noticing changes in behavior. We're noticing new behaviors, like his teacher today sent me a note home telling me he kept interrupting while she was talking. I asked him about it, and he had a meltdown. He really is a rule follower, so I don't know what's happening. So often, boys will have kind of this co-occurring condition with autism of ADHD, or at the very least, poor executive functioning control. And so with that comes this impulsivity, right? That he just had to ask a question and just couldn't restrain himself and sort of, popped off with the question. So with this new level of testosterone that's kind of flowing through, that potentially could be part of the problem. Also, dealing with anger and that sort of thing, frustration. Again, very common problem with sort of this new surge of testosterone. It's very common that boys with autism, will then start struggling with, this anger and frustration. So one thing I would suggest considering is potentially taking him to see a therapist on a regular basis who will help him, kind of do like an anger management program. And I'm not saying that he's to that point yet, but that's the idea, right? The idea is to catch it early, and so that he can get in there and then learn the skills he needs in order to have good anger control and good anger management. So this way it'll keep him from getting trouble at school, along with, kind of stopping from him getting so many write-ups in the school, because that can be very problematic. That if he becomes too behavioral, the school may decide they're going to write him up for every last little infraction. And then the next thing you know, they're like, well, we can't deal with him. So, now we need to send him over to our district school that deals with behavioral students because we can't handle him. And that is definitely the very last thing that you would want to happen. So I hope you will consider that. So Melissa was just saying, I don't have the results until the first ARD meeting. And just so you know, ARD is like the MET or an IEP team meeting. It's specific to the state of Texas, and then like most states call it different things. Anyways, though, she said the first meeting is on 5/2. That's still a little ways out, isn't it? And she said it's difficult to reach the licensed psychologist. I know she is getting emotional and learning disability. So yes, the meltdowns and the tantrums. She's very aggressive in the school. So if she's very aggressive in the school, that to me means there's something else going on, right? Like behavior is communication. Even negative behavior is communication. So if she's being very aggressive in school, then something's not going on right. Like potential bullying could be happening. She could be having other issues, again, with sort of this unsupported anxiety issues. I've seen children get really aggressive when it comes to anxiety, or they kind of do the other direction. They'll completely shut down, and then you'll see children with selective mutism. But with the meltdowns and the tantrums, yeah, that's not good at all. And she would suffer exactly what I was just talking to Pamela about, where the school will continue to write her up for behavior referrals. And then the next thing you wind up having them recommend that she goes to a school only for children who have an emotional disability and or behavioral. And often I find that that's the last place you want your child to go, because children do learn things through peers. And if they're in a school setting where essentially all children are having these behaviors, they can pick up some new and very undesirable behaviors, right? And I would definitely fight and make sure that you try to keep her in not only the least restrictive environment that you can, but really fight for the services for her to deal with her sensory. Oh, and sensory is another reason she could be having meltdowns and getting aggressive at school. It's just kind of the sensory stuff just overwhelming her. And I've seen that happen too. So I think it's really critically important that the school works with her to address the sensory issues and the anxiety issues, to make sure that she doesn't have any issues with depression. And then I would have to kind of look a little more to kind of see, are there any other issues going on? So once you do get in her information from the school, from their psychoeducational evaluation, I'm happy to kind of look that over. I do charge a fee for it, but my fee I think is very reasonable. So just let me know if you're interested in that. And so Melissa did put in that it's the school licensed psychologist. So yes, there is actually a clinical, which is a medical psychologist, and then there are school psychologists. And Their practices are different, and what they do is different. So Pamela said, yes, he has ADHD. And she said, okay, that makes sense. So yes, ADHD is executive functioning control. So basically a child with ADHD therefore has poor executive functioning control. And I have 2 blog posts on AESA's website. One is executive functioning and the impact on learning. And then the second blog post is executive functioning and assistive technology. Those are both great blog posts with a lot of really useful information. Also, you can search the group. You search hashtag EF for executive functioning, because I get tired of writing it out. So I shortened it to EF. So search hashtag EF, and you'll turn up lots of information on executive functioning in the group, including a lot of goals and accommodations. And again, my blog post contains a lot of goals and accommodations, along with a lot of links to a lot of sites that also have goals and accommodations. So Lynn joined. Hi, Lynn. How are you? I hope you're doing fine. I haven't had a chance to talk to you in a while, so hopefully we can catch up before too long. So Melissa was saying, yes, she does both. She shuts down and she tantrums. So I'm sure that kind of depends on like what the situation is, and then, you know, how much like internally she's taking in. And it's sort of like a volcano, right? It's like holding it in, and just blah, erupts. And so it's that eruption where you probably are seeing these tantrums. And then the shutting down is kind of when she's just feeling really tired or beat down. So in the group, also search for hashtag anxiety. I have a lot of goals, information, help under hashtag anxiety. And it's not just anxiety information. It's sort of kind of like, I'll call it more behavioral health. So have a look at that information that's in the group. And if you don't know how to search the group, please let me know. I will walk you through how to do a group search, because this group has been in existence for a little over 2 years. And I have placed, I don't know, just scads of resources and information in the group. And most of that I have hashtagged so that you can turn around and get that information. All right. Let's see. So I did have, was kind of happy to hear here that there were a couple of members who were able to use information successfully and triumph over in their meetings with the school district. So congratulations both to Christina and to Ronnie. So good job in advocating for your child. And I'm glad to hear that the information that you've received in the group helped you with that. I love hearing that. So if you guys do have success stories, please let me know. I love to hear when parents have been able to successfully advocate for their children, because like I said, to me, like that is my goal. My goal is to help you with giving you the information and the tools that you need for you to successfully advocate for your child, and for you to be like the best advocate for your child. I also posted a link talking about typefaces and fonts and which ones are easiest to read. So if your child has a visual impairment, I hope you take time to go read that information. It's important when you have school staff essentially printing off things like worksheets for your child, and your child has visual impairments, that they are using a font style that is easy for your child to read. And if not, then they're printing like a separate sheet for your child so that they can easily read it. Also, I have a couple of blog posts which discuss visual impairments. One of them is talking about visual impairments covers convergence insufficiency too. So just know if your child does have a visual processing problem like convergence insufficiency, then the school is responsible for working with your child and providing your child vision therapy. And again, guidance has come out specifically directing that. Okay, let's see. So Sarah was just saying, my son is getting a psychoeducational evaluation by an outside specialist in a couple of weeks. The school will also be doing one before the end of the school year. I scheduled the outside evaluation because I'm curious what another expert will find and just to gain as much information as possible to see how my son learns. Do I have to let him know that I've scheduled this? Actually, you should, and here's why. So when your private psychologist, since they're doing theirs first, I mean, if it was me, what I would do is I would have them do it after the schools, okay? But if they are going to do theirs first, that's fine. And remember how I talked earlier about medical and educational? So they're going to be doing a medical psychoeducational evaluation, or really it's more of a psychological evaluation. And they'll kind of cover up probably academics as part of that. But do know that you want to inform the school because they may choose testing instruments the school would choose. And the school and your private evaluator, they can't both use the same testing instruments like less than 1 year apart, because many of these, that invalidates the test scores. So if the school is going after your private psychologist and say like your private psychologist does the WISC-5, and then the school turns around and they do the WISC-5, the scores that you get on the WISC-5 from the school are invalidated. That's because they were done too close together. So just be aware of that and realize like you don't want the school repeating any of the evaluations that your private evaluator is going to be doing. And I do agree with you, by the way. I think it's great that you're doing both. Like I said, medical and educational people, they look at different things. So I think it's really important that you do look at both. And then you can also get a better idea about what's gone on in the evaluations and if things make sense. Also, I have seen where schools have improperly done evaluations and have said that the testing results were valid and they were not. It's not uncommon for me to find that, unfortunately. I would say easily find that in probably 1 out of every 8 psychoeducational evaluations I review. So just be aware. So Sarah also said, I would like to use the outside evaluation along with the schools for help with IEP goals, accommodations, and et cetera. And you can actually do that. Again, on AESA's website, in my blog, I have written blog posts concerning the neuropsychological domain. So like processing speed, working memory, executive functioning, because like you, I was trying to understand all this stuff too. And my children have some really interesting impairments that I didn't find until we had a neuropsychological exam. It was a private evaluation by a neuropsychologist. And in that, like one of the things that we found out is that Joseph has severely impaired processing speed. His processing speed is in the less than 0.1 percentile. He's an incredibly slow processor. And I wrote the blog post on processing speed with him in mind, you know, like, what does that mean? What's the ramifications? What do I see when I see somebody who has slow processing speed? And then how does that impact them? And how does that impact their learning? And I cover all of that in my blog posts, along with possible accommodations and modifications, because you do want modifications to curriculum if your child has impaired processing speed. So just some things to kind of think about. And then I also have a blog post on fluid reasoning. And that was a really great one to write too. Often children with autism have impaired fluid reasoning. And it was great to be able to research that and write that blog post so that I could better understand what does that impact mean, right? How does it affect my children? What do I see from that? How does it impact them educationally? And what kind of accommodations are reasonable to give them if they have impaired fluid reasoning? So all of that's covered in my blog posts. Let's see. So Sarah was saying, wow, it says, what if the private is done afterwards? Well, it's the same thing, right? It's just, so here's what happens with schools. It's very interesting. And I didn't even know this until like last year. So schools, what they do is like the school district at the district level, sometimes the state level, but usually it's the district level. The district level gets together and the school psychologist plus, whoever's at the district level administratively, they decide what psychometric exams. So these are like, what are the testing instruments that they're going to invest in as a school district? And then they purchase them. And they'll purchase like vast quantities of these tests. And then that's what they use to evaluate children. And that's one of the issues I have, because sometimes those evaluations are not appropriate for that child. And this is where you have to kind of really dig in and kind of research the information, like what are the testing instruments? What are the fallibilities of the testing instruments? And I've taken a lot of time and I've kind of researched all of this, read journal articles and all kinds of fun stuff. But I find all of this very fascinating. Like, I think if I could go back to school and be a neuropsychologist, I would, but like, I'm too old and I don't have enough time in my life to go back and to go study that, to professionally. But I have studied enough of it to be considered a well-versed amateur in that arena. And I find it very interesting, these psychoeducational evaluations that the schools do give. And so, like I said, just realize they're sort of limited in what they can pick because that's what the school system invested in. But your private evaluator, they don't have such limitations. And so if they need to pick some other evaluation, they can. And so it's kind of nice because then it allows the school to use whatever testing instruments that they're going to use. And then your private evaluator can pick others that kind of help support or kind of look at and test areas that the school's evaluation missed. So that's why I think the private evaluation should be done after the schools. And so just something to consider. All right. So Sarah was saying, thank you. So hopefully that helps answer your question. And if you have any more question on that, or if you have anything else that you want to know, please let me know. And I will make sure that I post that information in the group. So let's see. So Sarah Brown, she was just saying, she goes, does it invalidate if the private is done afterwards? No, it does not, as long as the testing instruments your private evaluator uses are not the same instruments the school uses. So if the school tests first, you get the information of the names of the evaluations that they use to test your child, and you let your private evaluator know so they do not pick the same things. All right. Or if you have the paperwork completely done, then you can just give it to the private evaluator. But you should be able to ask, and the school should be able to tell you what evaluations, like what are the names and what evaluations, like what are they going to test your child on. So they should be able to tell you all of that information. And it technically, in my opinion, should be on the consent letter that you sign for testing. Now, often it's not. They just put vague things like, we're going to test speech, but they don't say how they're going to do it. But you legally are within reason because it does state in the law that you need to have consent. And you can't do that unless you've been fully informed. So if you are asking the question, what testing instrument are you going to use? They really should be responding and telling you. So just so you know. So, because I have two Sarahs here. So Sarah went on to say, she goes, I'm in the same boat as Sarah, the other one. And so should I give the private evaluation to the school's evaluators to know to do different testing? So technically, yes, your school psychologist should know not to use the same testing instruments. Now notice I said should know. Why did I say should? Because I have completely seen it done. Where the parent told me, I gave the private evaluation to the school, then the school psychologist turned around and they chose the same testing instrument. Because I did point this out to the parent when I was reviewing these, psychoeducational exams. And I was really confused by that. Well, apparently what happened is that school psychologist, though the parent had given the information to the school, I don't know if the school didn't give it to the school psychologist or if the school psychologist just never bothered reading it. But they wound up choosing the same testing instrument, and it wound up invalidating the school's test. Now, what was kind of fun about that is that then gave an avenue for the parent to ask for an IEE. So, that's kind of like maybe the upside to that potentially, right? But yes, it did allow them to ask for an IEE and some additional testing that was more appropriate for her child. So Sarah was just saying, you just answered my clarification, so thank you. Anyways, Terry was just saying good night. So yes, it is actually, it's been about an hour and a half now. And this is usually about when we wrap up. So does anybody else have any other questions that they have for this evening? If so, I'll answer them really quickly. Other than that, then I think we will wrap up for the evening. And I did want to tell you all, thank you very much for joining me. I hope that you found this interesting and at least somewhat educational, right? And I will see you guys next week, along with answering some of these questions that I've received kind of in the comment stream. I'll go back through and I'll provide some information and some links for you guys, okay? All right. Well, all of you have a good night. Thank you so much. And I will see you back next Wednesday. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Margaret. Jumping in.
I didn't know we moved it to 4 states. I actually didn't know we moved it to 4 states.